Hello everybody and welcome to your next chapter of Kick. Let's recap what happened in the last one. So the last one we left it where Buddy had found his uncle and that then he went to find a police officer to tell the dragon that he'd found him. So let's see what happens in the next chapter. This chapter is called The Impossible Dream. The Chief Inspector is not alone. He's brought 2 officers with him, and all 3 of them squint into the rain. "Where is he?" the Chief Inspector asks. "Before I tell you, I need you to promise not to hurt him." The Chief Inspector slaps me across the face. "I'll hurt who I like," he says. "Now where is he?" "Doesn't know you're coming, so it'll be better if I talk to him." I get another slap. "I'm warning you. You either tell us where he is, or you can share a cell with your father." I rub my cheek. "Follow me." We walk around to the side of the factory. The 2 officers draw their revolvers and hold them out in front, just like in the movies. Except the real bad guy isn't the one hiding in the bin. He is the one with his hand on my shoulder, keeping me in front like a human shield. "If this is a trap, I'll break your neck before you can scream," the Chief Inspector mutters, digging his fingers into the soft muscle around my spine. I come to a stop. "Which one?" he hisses. I point to the right bin. "Could be a trap, sir," one of the officers says. "There could be a lot of firework in the rest of those bins." "Should I call up for backup?" The Chief Inspector waves the officers forward with his free hand. "We don't need backup, just get that bin open." The officers creep forward, exchanging glances every few steps. When they reach the bin, they stand on either side and raise their guns to the lid. One of them places a hand on the edge as they count down. "Tigger, Duna, Satu." The lid swings open and the 2 officers point their guns into the bin. They bark orders, shouting to be heard against the rain. Uncle emerges with his hands up, looking bewildered. Then he sees me standing beside the Chief Inspector, and his face falls. The Chief Inspector's hand rests on my shoulder, and I glance up to see a wide, ugly smile. "Get the cuffs off him!" he shouts. Uncle is dragged onto the wet ground and forced to place his hands behind his back. He manages to twist his neck to look at me. The Chief Inspector pats me on the shoulder. "Good boy," he says. "You'll go far in this world." When he says that, my heart feels like it's been kicked. Hard. Like a goal line clearance in the 90th minute. Uncle is lifted to his feet and marched to the Chief Inspector's car. He doesn't look at me as he passes. "Put him in the back," the Chief Inspector says, "and not a word of any of this to anyone." He reaches into his pocket and splits a bundle of notes between the 2 officers. They get into a separate car and pull away from the roadside. "Little Lazaro," the Chief Inspector says, grinning, "why don't you sit in the front with me, like a real policeman?" He opens the passenger door and I slump onto the seat. I'm not tall enough to see Uncle's reflection in the mirror, and for once I'm grateful for being small. I stare through the rain-speckled windscreen as the Chief Inspector climbs in and steps on the accelerator. It's the first time I've ever been in a car. It's one of the worst experiences of my life. Even though the journey's over in a couple of minutes, it feels like we drive for miles and miles. The wiper things thrash from side to side, but the screen is never clear. I wish my uncle would say something, anything, but he doesn't. The silence gets so big I worry the windows are going to shatter under the pressure. I sink lower in my seat. The side streets leading to the Dragon's house are too narrow for the police car, so we get out and walk. The Chief Inspector holds onto Uncle's handcuffs, steering him through the dark alleyways. I'll trail behind, dragging my feet. We climb the steps to the first floor and find the Dragon sitting in the near darkness. He smiles at the sight of my uncle and the reddish ciria spit between his teeth looks black in the gloom. His jewellery catches a yellow light thrown from a lamp, making the gold chains around his neck look fake and tarnished. As he lifts his feet from the low table, he scatters loose notes onto the floor, but doesn't seem to notice. I've never seen the dragon stand up to greet anyone, but he hauls himself up out of his chair and holds Uncle by the shoulder. "Aaron," he says, still grinning, "it is a pleasure to meet you." Then he turns to the Chief Inspector and frowns. "Why is this hero handcuffed like a petty thief? The man is our guest. Untie him." "I thought it best, brother. He has a reputation, you know." "Reputation?" The dragon scowls. "Yes, I know. He has a reputation for escaping from a high-security prison. What use do you think those bracelets are going to be?" The dragon spits on the floor in his brother's direction. The Chief Inspector pulls a face but shuffles over and unlocks the handcuffs. "How did you find him anyway?" the dragon asks, returning to his seat. "Did the old woman turn him in?" "No, it was the boy." The dragon notices me for the first time. "You're a real bad man, little Lazaro. Not many people could betray their own family. It's not easy, I know. I'm sure you heard the rumour about one of my brothers who lost his fingers in an accident." The Chief Inspector shuffles uncomfortably. My uncle doesn't flinch. I look at the floor. "Shall I make the call to the station?" the Chief Inspector says, changing the subject. "Release the boy's father?" The dragon waves a hand. For the first time since he was arrested, Uncle glances at me. Let's see whether Aaron is willing to demonstrate a bit of family loyalty first. The dragon interlocks his fingers into one huge fist, the heavy rings jostling against each other for space. "You see, Aaron, you have arrived at a rather traumatic time for your family. Your brother Elvis is currently being questioned for information about your whereabouts. He says he doesn't know anything." "He doesn't," Uncle says through gritted teeth. "Well, that's what the Chief Inspector needs to be sure of before he can release him. In the meantime, Elvis's family, your family, are struggling to pay the rent, and it won't be long until your mother, sister-in-law and nephew are fighting for a shack in the slums." The dragon looks at me and smirks, although maybe you feel some of them might deserve it. Uncle takes a deep breath and fixes the dragon with his dark eyes. "So what do you want?" "I want you to help me. Right now, there is a container truck sitting outside a factory where your nephew works. It's full of football boots. Hundreds and hundreds of pairs. We're talking billions of rupee. And it will sit there all day tomorrow and all night before someone drives to the port on Monday morning." The dragon pauses to fire a watery jet of spit over his shoulder. "Now, this isn't a Jakarta street stall we want to rob. This container belongs to some rich Americans, and when they find out what's happened, they won't just let it slide. My brother won't be any protection against a foreign investigation, so we need someone who can break into the truck without leaving a trail. Someone like you, Aaron." Uncle shakes his head. "It can't be done," he says. The dragon's eyes widen. I should have warned Uncle that nobody crosses the dragon unless they want to be chewed up and spat out. "Of course it can be done. Your career is legendary. People still can't believe some of the jobs you've pulled." "I got caught, didn't I?" "And you escaped." Uncle shakes his head. "It won't work. If no one discovered what had happened until a few weeks later, after the container arrived at its destination, you might have a chance, but the container won't even make it out of the port." "Why not?" the Chief Inspector asks. Uncle glances over his shoulder, but responds to the dragon. "Because they weigh each container to make sure it's right. If the weight is too far out, they open it up and check what's inside." The dragon grins and spits bubbles around his teeth. "We won't be taking things out. we'll be putting something back in. Like what? Uncle frowns. People. People? I blurt out, but the dragon ignores me. For every pallet we remove, we'll replace it with someone who has paid to get out of this place. The dragon looks at me. You might want to consider it too, little Lazaro. If you've got 1,000,000 rupees to spare, I'll book you a space. Uncle rubs a hand across his face. And if I help you, my brother will be released. Of course, the dragon says. And then what? Your brother hands me in and gets a medal? The dragon and Chief Inspector exchange a glance. We can keep you out of prison, the dragon says, sitting forward in his chair. Do this for us and we'll give you a new life, a new start for you and your family. And I'm supposed to just take your word for it? Uncle says, looking from the dragon to the Chief Inspector and back again. Not that it matters, not that I have a choice. Then he looks at me. I came here to make things right with my family, and if this is what it takes, then that's what I'll do. The dragon smacks his hand down on one of the arms of the chair. That's it, settled. You can stay here tonight. We'll get you a change of clothes and something to eat. Do you want me to send for anything else, brother? Uncle stares at the dragon. I just want a meal and a bed, that's all. We'll send someone out for food. You can have anything you want. The dragon waves his hands at me. Why don't you go home, little Lazaro, and remember to keep what you've heard to yourself. Otherwise, you'll end up in a cell with your father and your uncle, while the women in your family work for me. My hands curl into a fist. I want to beat the dragon's smug expression into his skull. But I notice that Uncle is looking at me, and the stillness in his eyes calm me down. It's okay, buddy, he says. Go home now. I can't believe how much he looks like Dad, and suddenly it doesn't feel as though we've been kept apart for years and years. It feels as though he's been looking after me all along. We'll call for you tomorrow evening, the dragon says, twisting one of his rings around his finger. You know the factory compound as well as anyone. We might need you. The Chief Inspector grips my arm and shoves me out of the room. He follows me down the stairs but stops at the entrance, not wanting to step into the rain. I glance back as I cross the square and he spits into the dirt. As soon as I turn the corner, I run, not stopping until I reach the apartment. Grandma is asleep in the darkness, her breathing slow and shallow. I creep towards my room, glad that I don't have to talk to anyone, and curl up on my mattress. I hear Mum come home a while later. She wakes Grandma and says that she waited for hours at the police station, but they wouldn't let her speak to Dad. Grandma tells her not to worry. She tells her that everything will be all right, but I don't know whether to believe her. A cold tear runs across my cheek and soaks into the mattress. It's the first time I've ever thought Grandma might be lying. Mum must go to bed soon after because gradually everything grows quiet except the pattering of raindrops outside. Grandma coughs in the next room and I decide to get up. The room is completely black except for the glowing orange tip of Grandma's cigarette. Are you okay, Grandma? I ask. Can I get you some water? It's very kind, buddy, but I'm fine, thank you. The orange glow flares up into an angry red, then almost disappears completely. Would you like me to tell you a story? She asks. I walk over and sit cross-legged on the threadbare patch by her chair. She coughs quietly like she's growling. What kind of story would you like? She says. I don't mind. How about your favourite? My favourite? Well, let me see. That's a tough one. Did I ever tell you the story about the swimmer? No. Is it your favourite? I should say so. Then why haven't you told it before? Grandma takes one last drag on her cigarette and stubs it out. Because I wanted to save the best for last, she says. You haven't got any more stories to tell? I ask. Nope. This is the last one. I never thought Grandma would run out of stories. Now then, she says, the story goes that there was a boy who lived on a remote island. Is this the one with the big coconut tree? Because you've told me this one already. No, that's about a different boy on a different island. It's a completely different story altogether. Now, where was I? Oh yes. There was once a boy who lived on a remote island. What was his name? His name was Buddy. No, it wasn't. You're making this up. Are you calling me a lie, young man? I'll have you know this story has been told for generations, and I doubt anyone has interrupted its telling as much as you have. And it's true that the boy was called Buddy. But that's my name. I know. You were named after him. Really? I didn't know that. Well, you were. I suggested the name to your parents when you were born, and they asked, why Buddy? They were sceptical at first. After all, I did name your father Elvis. She laughs, but it soon turns into another hacking cough. Anyway, after I told your parents this story, they thought it was a wonderful name, and they agreed to call you Buddy. So how does the story go? As I was saying, there was once a boy named Buddy who lived on a remote island. Life on this island was very tough, and it was often a struggle just to get by. They didn't even have the tools or resources to build boats, so they had to fish by wading into the shallows with spears. It was very primitive, but everybody worked together and kept each other happy, even when the storms came or they didn't have much to eat. None of the surrounding islands thought much of Buddy's island. They said it was too small and rocky and exposed. Life was too harsh, so they never visited. But occasionally bad weather would force fishermen from other islands onto the shore, and for a few hours Buddy and his family would hear stories about how much better life was across the water. No matter how much Buddy pleaded with the fishermen, they never allowed him to journey back to these distant paradises in their boats. He was well and truly marooned. Grandma stops, and after a while I begin to think she might have fallen to sleep. Then I hear a rattling sound, and all of a sudden a flame bursts into life, throwing white light onto her face. It makes her look very pale, and all the little wrinkles lengthen and multiply as she sucks on the end of a new cigarette. She shakes her hand, and the matches go out. What happened next, Grandma? Did he get off the island? All in good time. There's no rush. One night there was a terrible storm that felled a lot of the trees in the islanders relied on for food and shelter. When the skies finally cleared, things were worse than ever. That's when Buddy decided that he had to get off the island. But how? They didn't have any boats, remember? I know, and Buddy knew this as well as anybody. But there's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet. Buddy loved to swim. He went out into the ocean every day, not just to fish, but to swim between the waves. He used to circle the island, which admittedly wasn't very far, and dive underwater to see how long he could hold his breath. The only problem was that the nearest island was little more than a smudge on the horizon, and that's a long way, even for a good swimmer. Still, times were very tough on the island, and Buddy knew he had to do something. So the day after the storm, just after sunrise, Buddy announced that he would swim to the next island. As you might imagine, the islanders were full of discouragement. What about the sharks and the jellyfish? One of them asked. The currents will drag you out to sea, another said. It's too far, they all agreed. Of course, Buddy knew this. He knew how great the dangers were, but to do nothing might prove equally perilous. Indeed, the only people who supported his decision were his family and friends. But weren't they worried about him? And wouldn't they be sad if he went? Of course, but they knew it was for the best, and so they were happy to see him go in a sad way. They watched him wade out into the ocean and followed him for as long as possible. Soon he was just a speck between the waves. Then they lost sight of him altogether. You see, sometimes you have to go it alone, miles away from land, with aching arms and tired legs. Buddy must have felt miserable, lonely and afraid. But I'm sure he also knew that even during times of desperate isolation, you are never truly alone. There is always someone rooting for you, always someone who believes. And he knew that if he never stopped kicking, he would get there in the end. You must never give up, Buddy. You must keep kicking. I believe in you. Grandma falls silent, and in between drags, I hear her heavy breathing. What happened next? I asked quietly. Did he make it? What do you think? I'm not sure. I hope so. The glowing orange tip dances in the darkness as Grandma adjusts her position. You fell out with your friend, didn't you? How do you know that? There isn't much that gets past an old lady like me. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. I rubbed my side where Rochi punched me and suddenly realised that I do want to talk about it more than anything. Rochi said that I'll never become a professional footballer and that I'll never see Kieran Wakefield play at the Bernabeu. He pinned me to the ground and punched me as well. Even though it's Grandma, and even though I know she can't see me, I feel ashamed. That's not very nice of him. I thought Rochi was a friendly boy. He is, at least I thought he was. I'm sure he didn't mean to hurt you. People say and do lots of things they don't mean when they're angry or upset, but you mustn't listen to them. Don't let anybody tell you something is impossible. Impossible is nothing. Grandma's cigarette crackles and glows as she takes another drag. I'm sure you won't stay enemies for long. Everything will be back to normal again soon. Now it's very late. I think maybe you should go to bed. Just one more thing, Grandma, and then I'll go, I promise. Okay, what is it? I desperately want to tell her that her son is hiding just around the corner, that she doesn't need to worry about choosing between her children because I've done it for her, that we're on the verge of a new life together, the 5 of us. But then I remember the dragon's warning about how he would ruin us all if I mentioned anything and changed my mind. Sometimes sharing is a selfish thing to do. Did you ever get to meet Elvis? I ask. Grandma chuckles. Oh, I wondered what you were going to ask me then. But did you? Grandma sighs. Yes, just once. It was very memorable. But that's another story for another time. I thought you didn't have any stories left to tell. Grandma chuckles again. You don't miss anything, do you? Now give me a hug before you go. I stand up and Grandma squeezes me tightly. I pick my way through the darkness to my bedroom, but as I reach the door, Grandma stops me. Buddy, she says, no matter what happens, keep kicking. I look back, but all I can see is a glowing tip of her cigarette. Good night, Grandma. Good night.